The presenting partner of today's episode is Saxton Speakers, Australia's leading speakers bureau. At Saxton, they know that the right speaker can be the most powerful part of any event, leaving a lasting impression that sticks with your audiences long after the final applause. With decades of experience, Saxton's team will match you with your perfect speaker, MC, or entertainer to elevate your event, delivering energy, insight, and inspiration like no else. Partner with Saxton and give your audience an experience they'll never forget.
You really have to open yourself up to others, open yourself up to failure, because mistakes are the way to success in new environments. There's nothing you're good at today that you didn't get good at by making mistakes. If you think about it, nothing. So rather than being fearful of making mistakes, you've got to be willing to try and knowing that failure will bring learning.
Welcome to Future Fit Leadership, a podcast for emerging, experienced and executive leaders to build community, grow capability and future focus their career pathways. There has been a global shift in how we lead, and our conversations with leaders and executives explores the skills, strategies and mindsets that is needed to thrive in this ever-evolving landscape of the future. So whether you are a seasoned executive, an aspiring leader, or simply curious about the future of leadership, we are here to give you practical insights to unlock your potential, change the status quo, and break open our assumptions on how work works. Produced in partnership with Future Leadership, a capability ecosystem for boards and executives, Future Fit Leadership is your place for bite-sized learning for executives hungry to make a change.
Hello and welcome to Future Fit Leadership. I'm your host, Sadhna Smiles, and I hope wherever you are listening to this podcast, you are well. Today's guest, Steve Vamos, embodies what it means to be a future fit leader. With decades of experience steering companies like IBM, Apple, Microsoft, and Xero, he brings a deep understanding of the human side of leadership and a wealth of personal insights from some of the most defining moments of his career. In this episode, Steve takes us back to his time at Apple during some of its most turbulent years, just before Steve Jobs returned to transform the company. He shares a pivotal lesson he learned firsthand, the power of focus and the courage to say no. When Jobs cut 75% of Apple's product line to save the Macintosh, it wasn't just about strategy. It was a profound act of clarity that shaped Apple's future. Steve talks about how that experience left a lasting impact on him, teaching him that prioritization and focus are essential to guiding teams through tough times. But Steve's journey didn't end there. His stories also reflect the importance of leading with purpose and empathy, qualities he leaned into during his time as CEO of Xero. Tasked with scaling a global business, Steve didn't just set ambitious goals. He focused on building an environment where people felt connected to the company's purpose. He explains that leading effectively means creating spaces where individuals are inspired to push beyond their limits, to truly exhaust their potential by aligning their work with a larger vision. For Steve, the secret to a successful organisation lies in clarity and alignment, where each person knows why they're there and how their contributions shape to the bigger picture. In this episode, you'll also hear about the importance of a learning mindset, something Steve has carried with him into every role. Stepping into unfamiliar industries and even entire fields, he leaned on listening and adapting, embracing the discomfort of not always having the answers. He believes that this openness to learning and growth is essential for any leader facing change, and he encourages all of us to approach new challenges with curiosity, humility, and resilience. As he puts it, we can't grow without failure, and it's only through mistakes and learning that we uncover our full potential. Steve is in the process of releasing his book, Through Shifts and Shocks, Lessons from the Front Line of Technology and Change, which is out on the 27th of November. Join us as we dig into the wisdom and personal stories and hard-won lessons from Steve Vamos. And if you're looking to become a leader who can inspire change, drive innovation, and connect deeply with your team, this episode of Future Fit Leadership is for you. Well, good morning, Steve. Welcome to Future Fit Leadership. Very excited to have you on our podcast this morning. How are you?
I'm very good. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Now, here we were talking before we went on air this morning, and you tell me you're living in windy Wellington at the moment.
Yeah, and it's actually, you know what, today, not too windy, but very gloomy and still with a bit of light rain. So Wellington has plenty of different weather to throw at you, that's for sure.
I've been there a few times. It's always fun flying into that city. I know that for sure.
Yep.
Hey, I want to start our conversation today by talking about all the different companies that you've worked for. You know, when I was doing some research around your work history as such, I noticed that you worked for IBM, you've worked for Apple, Microsoft, Channel 9, and then Xero. And one of the things I've seen you write on LinkedIn was that you're very fortunate to have worked in some of the best places at the worst of times. I found that really fascinating. Talk to me as to why you saw that as fortunate.
I see it as fortunate because I think it's in the tough times that you really get to observe so many aspects of what leadership is about, but also what really makes a difference, and also the importance mostly of mindset and the way people think. You know, the standout experience for me there was at Apple. And I was at Apple for 5 or 6 of the toughest years of Apple's life. We had three CEOs over the course of that time. Initially, we had Michael Spindler, who was a really kind of dour fellow, German fellow, who really believed that for Apple to succeed, it had to beat Microsoft and Intel. And then he was replaced by a guy called Gil Amelio, who was a turnaround guy, looked back to where Apple came from, and that had some elements of success to it, but he didn't last long in the job. And then Steve Jobs came back. And what was profound was how the mindset of those leaders really shaped the company. And I think in the face of really difficult times, and that was certainly difficult times for Apple, you really get to see how important the way leaders and people think really is to the fate of an organization.
Talking about Steve Jobs, he, if I read that correctly, sent you an email once that had a significant impact on you. Talk to us about that.
Well, it was really, when we talk about what he did to save Apple, we often think about all the innovations, you know, the iPod, you know, the evolution of the Macintosh, the iPad, you know, so many different things. But really what Steve did was have the courage to focus the company at a time where it really needed it. So he cut 75% of the product line. And we had an interaction about that because there were thousands of software developers developing on this platform, which was called the Apple Newton. And he decided he was going to terminate that product line. And so I emailed him and said, hey, are you really sure about this? And it was just a quick one-liner where he said, we must save the Mac. And I do believe there's a really important lesson in that, which is that, you know, focus is about saying no. And if you really want to be good at something, that means that you've probably said no to doing other things. And that was really the standout example for me of Jobs' leadership.
I like that because quite often as leaders, we feel the need to say yes all the time because of stakeholder requirements, board requirements, consumer requirements, middle management requirements. And yet the power in the no perhaps is sometimes better than saying yes all the time.
Absolutely. Look, prioritization is one of the toughest things you face, probably broadly in life, but really in the work context as a CEO or a senior leader. You have to prioritize because, as you just said, you can say yes to it and give a little bit of something to everything, or you can say we want to be really good at these three things, and that's what's going to get the support of the organization. And the hardest part is saying no to good people who have good ideas. That's what's tough.
How do you do that?
You have to explain to them that where the broader priorities of the organization lie. And in fact, you come to value people who appreciate that. I mean, they're the people you want around you, the ones who, you know, are willing to accept that the purpose of the organization is defined, and therefore the priorities have to line up with where you want to, you know, why you're there and what you want to accomplish, which means that even though I might miss out on what I want, I can see the benefit to the organization of moving forward, doing the things that have been chosen to be done. So that's organizational life. You don't get your own way every time, but you do, if you believe in where the company's going and you're part of the management team and you're respected and you're heard, then you can accept decisions that don't go your way.
Let's talk about your time at Xero. You were there for just over 5 years. Is that correct?
Yeah, 5 years as CEO. Prior to that, I spent 18 months as a coach advisor to the founder, Rod Drury.
And so what drew you to the role at Xero, or was it through this relationship with the founder that you stepped into the CEO role?
Yeah, I worked with Rod for 18 months and really, to his credit and to other members of his team, they asked me to come in and work with the team on really what was most important is scaling Xero to the next level. Because Rod always had the vision of Xero being a global technology business supporting small businesses all over the planet. So how to get there really came down to some operating disciplines that Rod and I worked on together. And that related to how we chose and developed products through to how we did sales and marketing, and even how we set strategy and the process around strategy. So as we were working on those processes, Rod reached out to me early in 2018 and said, look, I now understand the work we've got to do, and it's really not work that he really wanted to do. And so he said it was time for him then to really step down. He informed the chairman that they should look for another CEO. And he encouraged me to throw my hat in the ring, and that's how it all happened.
All started from there. And under your leadership, Xero did grow globally and quite quickly. What were some of the challenges that you faced around, two-part question, the growth piece, but also leading teams from different regions around the globe?
Yeah, look, the growth, and it's a technology industry thing. Most technology companies that are going places have a growth mindset.
Mm.
So you're always conscious of the opportunity and where you want to be. And you're really working hard to change the company as it is today to be the company you know it has to be as it grows and evolves. And usually that's really, and this is something that I don't think gets enough focus. It's not why you're doing what you're doing. That's usually pretty obvious. And it's not even what you're doing. It's how you're doing it. So the biggest challenge in growing is really getting focused and putting the time into defining how you do things so that as you evolve, you're improving and changing how you work together. Because it's really how you work together that gets in the way, not the what or the why. So we spent a lot of time in executing change programs around all our different business processes, from product through to sales, through to marketing. And it was a constant effort to continue to evolve and improve. And you never actually catch up to where you want to be because of the nature of the business. But I would say that's the biggest challenge, is that you're not spending your time on all the big ideas. You're spending your time on how do we get better at doing the things we need to do, basic things to serve our customers, build better products, and to provide a better service around the world.
Mm. And managing such various, different teams and different, because you would have been from different backgrounds, different countries, different cultures. How did you bring all of that together?
Well, it's interesting because, I've been in the technology industry pretty much my whole career with IBM, Apple, Microsoft, and then Xero. And one of the beautiful things about technology companies that I operate globally is they're incredibly inclusive, because the purpose of the organization goes beyond kind of cultural bounds. I mean, you want to help small businesses operate more effectively. Well, that translates into every language where there are small businesses. So it wasn't so much cultural differences that were a challenge. It was more, how do you, for example, prioritize product when you have competing requirements and different requirements to serve customers in different markets? That's probably the toughest challenge. And that goes to prioritization as well, because you have to say to people in Canada or the US, Australia, New Zealand, you have to say, sorry, that requirement isn't one that is going to meet the prioritization list this year. And that's what makes it tough. So the cultural side of it, it translates really well. I never found, something Rod and I would always talk about was that you could go to Xero in the US, Xero in Canada, Xero in South Africa, and it felt like Xero. It didn't feel radically different country to country because we had that unifying purpose.
Yeah, your company culture and values sort of superseded the countries and the people connected with it.
And the Xero values were all about, in a sense, bringing the best of human to work. And there isn't a human on the planet who doesn't relate well to the idea that I should be able to come to work, be listened to, be respected, and do some great work. That's something we all want. So that's very powerful in the culture.
One of the things Xero is well known for is the customer experience. What steps did you take to embed that customer first mindset in the organization?
Well, I really think that it started with the way the product was developed and the way that Rod and the team back then really involved customers and partners, so accountants and also the end customers, in the evolution of the business and the product. So, it starts with a really, in a sense, an open-minded approach. I think Rod, as a founder, was very open-minded. I mean, he had his views and he chased certain things, but he did that based on a belief that it could really change things for the better for customers. And for that reason, right the way through, I never felt I had to explain to Xero people or push Xero people to be customer oriented. We all got it, and it was all part of our fabric because our partners, and it's pretty famous in the industry that XeroCon and the way that Xero made accounting cool fostered this incredible partnership with accountants who became Xero and Xero, in a sense, Xero's Salesforce. So I think it's so deep in the culture right from the beginning that it's never been something that we've had to consciously convince people of in our business, which is, I think, fortunate. But also, again, technology companies, because they're always changing, because they're always looking to do new things, by definition, are much more tapped into customers and customer responses and reactions to what they do.
It's funny you say accountants embrace the technology, because my family's full of accountants. And one thing I do know is they're very traditional. And I'm interested, and I think a lot of the challenges we all face in business today is the digital transformation. And a lot of people, well, first of all, not everyone likes change, but the change is moving so rapidly, it's actually hard to stay on top of it. What were some of the unique challenges Xero had to overcome around that space and focusing into a very traditional market?
Yeah, look, it's interesting because whether it's Xero or, if I recall back to the days when I was at 9MSN and we were trying to convince people that digital advertising would work. It's one of those things where you start slow and you gain momentum by convincing one person after another that what you have is going to make life better for them and those that they work with. And you just have to hang in there. The digital media revolution took 10, 20 years before it became undeniable. There were people questioning it for many, many years. And same with cloud accounting. I mean, even today, there are less small businesses around the world using cloud accounting and getting the benefits of it than there are of those that do. So there's still a lot of work to be done, even in the Xero context, to convince more accountants and bookkeepers and more small businesses around the world to change. And change is challenging. You're spot on. I think, to me, change is the agenda that is the most significant agenda we face today, because we as individuals are challenged by change, and change requires collaboration and teamwork. And a lot of teams are not great teams. So if we really want new ideas and things we must get done to be embraced, we've got to be better at change. And that's persistence. It's about really being able to articulate what value you deliver and why change is important. And it's about caring about people and helping them through the fear and the doubts that come with change.
And with, particularly in such rapidly changing environments, building teams that are resilient and adaptable to change as well. How did you do that at Xero?
Yeah, look, I have a pretty clear model that I've learned over the years around teamwork and change. And by the way, great change is in a sense dependent on the same things that great teamwork and pretty much great anything depends on. To me, it starts with clarity. We're clear about why we're here and what's important, our priorities. And often in teams that aren't strong, they're unclear. There hasn't been a good prioritization process. Then the second one, which really lets down a lot of teams and change initiatives, is alignment. So we know where we want to go. Have we aligned our people, our resources, our money, and our time with what's most important in that change initiative? And again, that alignment piece is often the missing link or the weakest link, because in business, we've sort of been taught about strategy and how you define a purpose and priorities. We've been taught how to give people job objectives and to review them. We haven't really been taught in a consistent way the process I call alignment, which is how do you break down your intentions for change to the things that touch people every day at the front line of your organization. So alignment is the second one. And then the final one is focus on performance, which means really being clear about how are you going against your intentions. Are things going the way you hoped? If not, do you need to reprioritize, revisit what you thought was clear and adapt it, or realign? And it's that iteration between clear, aligned, performance review, clearly aligned. It's that iteration, how quickly you can adapt by being conscious of that process that will really help you either find your way to where you want to go, or maybe even allow you to get the space to be able to say, well, maybe that's not what we're trying to do here. We need to change our course.
Mhm.
So that's really the way I look at it, those three critical things, and making sure they're iterating quickly.
It's a really simple process. How often would you revisit that? Is it something you do on a quarterly basis or 6-monthly basis within the business?
For a company strategy, definitely quarterly, but there are some things that don't operate on that cycle, and some things that might operate. So for example, in your own life, you might say that every year I'm going to set a plan, which is going to be clear about what I try to achieve. Then your challenge is, are you going to align your actions with that, and how often will you review? And you might not need to review that regularly, or you might say, I want to review that every month. So it really depends on the change initiative or the intention you have as to how often it makes sense to check in. But quarterly for a company to review how are we going against our strategic priorities and intentions, I think is a good cycle.
Mhm. I want to tie mindset into this conversation. I know you've talked about it as well. And it's that voice in your head, isn't it, that gives you doubt or tells you to do something else, or there's a different priority, or, how do we overcome this mindset challenge that I think many of us are facing at the moment?
Yeah, look, I think the thing I've learned perhaps even more recently than you might think is how important it is to be self-aware and know yourself.
Mm.
Because, there's, an interesting thing that happens to us in that as human beings, we're kind of built to be on automatic most of the time, because we don't have the capacity. If you have to reprocess every single thing you're doing, you'd never get anything done. So we automate, when we're driving, we automate the process so we can do other things while we're driving. We can, have a conversation, we can think about other things. The trouble is that 95% of the time we're in automatic mode. And when you're really facing change, at the challenge of change, what'll happen if you're in automatic mode is you may not react the way you really should to the situation. So I really encourage people to get to know themselves, what on their journey might shape the way they think and they react, particularly when they're under pressure or when someone challenges them or something bad happens. How do you react in that moment? Are you conscious of your reaction, or do you just go, in a sense, into an unconscious mode, which is less productive? So from a mindset viewpoint, understanding and observing yourself. So observing yourself as an actor in a play rather than being the actor is really important, particularly in change, because a change mindset, in my view, is not as natural to us as humans as one that is about sustaining the current state. That's because fear is our natural reaction to change. And we have egos that value, ourself, what we know, what we've experienced and accomplished. And because of fear and ego, when you're confronted under pressure, you go into this self-protect mode. Whereas when you're facing change, you really have to open yourself up to others, open yourself up to failure, because mistakes are the way to success in new environments. There's nothing you're good at today that you didn't get good at by making mistakes. If you think about it, nothing. So rather than being fearful of making mistakes, you've got to be willing to try and knowing that failure will bring learning. Instead of trying to control situations, you've got to realize that in change, it's about how you care about others, listen to others, connect and enable others. When COVID hit Xero, I had 4,500 people around the world. And I remember being on the first call to the company to talk about our reaction to what was going on. And all I could say to our people was, do your best. That's all I can ask you. You do your best. Let us know how we can help you.
Mm.
So I couldn't control the situation. I had to connect and care and enable others. And then finally, I always love in the mindset context, Satya Nadella from Microsoft's language around, I'll take a learn it all over a know it all every day. And that's another important thing. So mindset is really about situation. If the situation I'm facing is not about change, it's okay to be in control. It's okay not to make mistakes. And it's okay to know what you're doing. That's fine. You expect it. As soon as it's changing, you want to be careful. That way of thinking can be problematic. You want to be open and caring, connecting, enabling, willing to make mistakes, and being a learn-it-all rather than know-it-all.
So, in a world today that's so rapidly changing and it's so critical for leaders to have that type of mindset,
Yeah.
how do I, as a leader, ensure that I maintain that mindset? Or maybe how do I work with my board to make sure that the board holds me accountable to that?
The main thing as a leader is that you are self-aware and you apply the right mindset to the right situation. Because if you're talking about financial reporting and data, you want to know what you're talking about. But when you're talking about changing environments, that's a different mindset. So what, as a board director or someone that's really looking at the performance or the nature of a leadership team, that's really what you want to find out is are the people in that team open-minded? Do they apply the right mindset for the right situation? I always think that, and I think this is a bit of a missing area of focus, is team performance. So we'll tend to look at business performance and we'll look at individual performance, say of a CEO. I actually think we need to look more at the performance of the leadership team.
Mm.
So how do they work together? How good a team are they? And there's a great way to understand that by asking a couple of simple questions. And I used to do this informally as a board director, one-on-one with different executives. And the questions I'd ask would be, out of 10, what would you give a score of how well aligned this team is to execute the strategy?
Like that.
Yeah. And there's another one, which is out of 10, how do you rate the performance of your team relative to its potential with the resources you have available today? Not if you had more money, not if you had more people, but with what you've got today, out of 10, how do you rate the performance of the team you are on? The interesting thing about those two questions is they really open the door to a really interesting conversation about, all right, what's stopping you from being aligned? What's stopping you from performing at a higher level? Because the best teams that I've interviewed, and I've done this many times now with teams and individuals, good teams score themselves 6 or 7 out of 10 for performance relative to what's possible. And then you say, well, what would be the one thing you would change to improve that? It's always about how they work together. So I think inspecting that and understanding that will give you really good insight, not just to the capability of the team, but to the character of the leader and the character of the members on the team. And so I really encourage that.
What role does failure play around that, and particularly around the piece around growth and learning and cultures that are allowed to grow through learning from their failures? How do we bring that into the business as well?
Yeah, well, this goes to the tolerance for mistake making. It's really important because if you're going to change anything from where it is today, failure will be confronted. And then if you react badly to it, the change will stop. So, the best example I had in my career was when I was a sales manager in Canberra, selling a big computer system to a university. And I had a very senior sales rep working with me on the opportunity, but I also had the managing director of the company as an executive sponsor of the process, and which would mean he would on occasions visit the customer and see from his own questioning how we were progressing with winning the business. And I was very confident we were going to win the business because my sales manager had a wonderful relationship with the decision maker. And every time the managing director, Brian Finn, visited, he'd say to me, Steve, I'm not sure you're going to get this. Doesn't feel right. And I said, Brian, don't worry. You know, we're going to get this deal. So not long after, my senior salesperson didn't come into work till late, and then finally rang me and told me that he'd got the call from his friend to the decision maker to say we didn't win the business. And then I had to ring the managing director of IBM, Brian Finn, and tell him the bad news. And I'll never forget it. I lost nights of sleep over this. I ring him. I said, Brian, got bad news to tell you. We didn't win the business. All he said to me was, Steve, I'm really sorry to hear it, and I hope that you learned something from this experience.
What a great response.
I know. I mean, he could have said, I told you so, you stupid, what? And from that, you know, by the way, I never, ever again in my career have lost business that I was convinced I was going to win. I never allowed myself to ever avoid asking the tougher questions that are necessary to avoid that from happening. And but he also is a great example to me as a leader that's the way you handle failure. You don't. If you want to scream and shout, you'll feel better for a few minutes, but it doesn't produce anything positive.
No. Tying this into culture, you talk about 5 things you do obsessively to create a great culture. Talk to us about the 5 things that you do obsessively.
Well, culture to me is, and I think that it would be a lot easier to talk about culture if we agreed a common definition. So it's not values and behaviors, that's part of it. Culture, in my opinion, is the human aspect of any organization. If you took the people away, what would be missing? It would be the culture. So they're the things that really unite people. It's purpose. If you change the purpose of your organization, there will be people immediately who will opt out. So your culture is defined by your purpose. If you look at even how you go about doing what you do, your orientation towards different business functions, that will also change your culture. And within that, there are different cultures within every organization because the sales culture is different to a product development culture. So to me, culture is really about the human element. So if you really want to develop the human element of your organization, it is about those 3 things: being clear, being aligned, having a focus on performance. But at the heart of it, it's about the nature of the conversations and choices you make. So you have to be able to have difficult conversations and also make tough choices if you want to create a really healthy culture. Because avoiding those things, not having the difficult conversation about performance, about priorities, about anything, is really what is going to inhibit change and evolution. And that's what can cause the culture, in a sense, to become less vibrant and less attractive to people in it. So to me, if you want to build a great culture, it's like a great change initiative or it's a great team. It's really about those things: clarity, alignment, performance, and then having tough conversations and making the tough choices as well.
I remember reading somewhere that you actually stood up in a room, and I think you were at Channel 9 at the time, 9MSN, correct me if I'm wrong, and you asked everybody in the room, who is happy here?
Oh, yeah.
And talk to us about that, because that was a really brave thing to do, to stand up as a leader and say, tell me whether you're happy or not.
Well, 9MSN really was, in a sense, the most important era of my career, because prior to that, I was taught how to be a good manager and I knew how to practice. But after that, I understood why it mattered so much, why what I was taught was so important. And I also learned a lot more. So 9MSN was born with $100 million cash, 100 smart people, and aspiration to build a digital media business, a very, very unusual startup. And after a year of working together, I realized that despite having beautiful offices to work in, lots of money, and everyone was creative. Everyone was doing their own creative, building websites in lifestyle, in news, in sport, and finance. And so I thought, this is an amazing environment, but people weren't happy. So I got them all in a room, and I could with 100 people. And I asked them to rate out of 10 how happy they were working at 9MSN. And the score came back at around 4.5, 5. And at first, as an older person relative to this young crew who'd been through a lot more of the tough industry turndowns and issues, I thought, boy, these people are so spoiled, that how could they not be happy in this environment? So then I asked them, what's wrong? And it was profound. They said, we don't know why 9MSN is here and what we're trying to accomplish collectively. So that means that even though we're doing our own thing, we don't know how that's going to add up. And that's when I realized that having purpose, which I always knew, I knew having a clear purpose was important, but I never understood the importance of clarity of purpose and priorities. So over the next 12 months, all we did was get clearer about our why, clearer about our priorities, which actually meant reducing from doing 10 things to doing 3, which was really tough because it involved people and change in the nature of the organization. And then a year later, we did the survey again. And at that point, it was 8 out of 10. And it stayed at 8 out of 10 for many years after. And so that turned me from someone who practiced purpose and priorities because I was taught to someone who did it because of the real deep belief that it's a difference maker.
Yeah.
And prioritization is a difference maker.
You actually saw the difference it made in people once they knew what their purpose was and why they were there.
Yeah, exactly. And that was really interesting because they had everything to be totally happy in doing what they were doing.
Mm. The source of knowledge that people have in the marketplace today, customers have, is so different to what it was 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 3 years ago. How do businesses control that experience now that our customers have so much knowledge?
Yeah, look, I think, again, the most important thing is that you're aware of the knowledge sources that your customers have and are able to shape your message and the way you serve them to meet their needs with that backdrop. So don't try and be everybody else, but understand what else is out there, because that's critical to evolving your own business over time and understanding how customers are moving. Ultimately, the early signs of death of an organization come from declining relevance. And the way to gauge your relevance is to what's happening in the world is to understand where your customers are getting information and what other things they're looking at. So I think it's a really important reference point.
What do you see what do you see shaping the future of work for us today? We've gone from, COVID, we all got sent home globally. We've come back. We've got this hybrid world of work now that we're struggling with and trying to work through as leaders. What do you see shaping the future of work, and how can leaders and companies best prepare for what's coming for us?
I do think that it comes down to change again, that we now have people who work in our organizations that have potential that far exceeds the potential people had when they entered the workforce, certainly when most senior people started. And so, something I really believe is you've got to be careful about allocating work via task. Like if you're task oriented and you say to people, this is your job and these are the tasks, here's what I reckon is happening in many industries. Not all of them, but in the industries where you're not physically on site doing work that's observable, youngsters are getting through their full-time tasks in 2 or 3 days a week, and they're starting to do other things with their time. So instead of allocating tasks to these people, I highly recommend you talk about potential and what's possible. So the critical thing here is to appreciate that all your people can be change agents and can come up with some amazing things by virtue of the information they have access to and their ability to connect with others. So create an environment where it's friendly towards change, but you're really focused on making sure people are really exhausting their potential rather than doing tasks that you might have predetermined. So that's, I think, the most important thing.
I like that, exhausting their potential. It's a great way to look at it.
Yeah, I think that's the big change now, that people can do things that we've just got to invite them, and that means making sure they're all aware of where you're trying to head as an organization, making sure about what's most important, and then not necessarily telling them straight up how to do what you want them to do, but really having a conversation about what's possible and what could be the best outcome.
Now, you've written a book, Steve, since leaving Xero, and it's called Through Shifts and Shocks, Lessons from the Front Line of Technology and Change. It's available from the 27th of November. What inspired you to write this book, and what is it about?
It really was inspired by the 5 years at the beginning of the digital media revolution at 9MSN, where I went into that company knowing nothing about advertising, nothing about media. I was a computer sales guy, technology sales guy, and I became the CEO of this company where every meeting I went to, I knew less than everybody in the room about the domain. So all I could do for the first couple of years was go to meetings, listen and learn, and then do what I could to get the obstacles out of the way of the people. And that wasn't easy. The first few years were really tough because we had, as I said earlier, 10 aspirations that were never going to be achievable. We had to whittle those down to 3 or 4 things we could do and do reasonably well. And I remember about year 3, we emerged. We emerged as the leader in the industry. Even though digital advertising was still years away from being broadly accepted, we were making traction. And I was sitting in my office looking at a blank wall, and I thought, wow, what a blessing coming into this job with no expertise was. Because what I've learned now, what I realize now, is that leadership is about creating a great environment for others. It's not about me. It's about how I enable others to be their best and how I create great teams and how I help people face into change. And so that's really the learning that gave me a context for everything I've been taught by IBM and at Apple before. And then I've carried that through in every role that I've had since, and it's been really, really helpful. So it's something that I really feel that in these changing and uncertain times, that as we all face our own shifts and shocks in life, this is a book that covers 8 fundamental things that really do make the difference. And there's so much noise out there around teamwork, leadership, and change that I really felt almost a responsibility to share that. Say, look, there's a lot out there, but if you do these 8 things or keep them in mind, you don't have to do them all great. You never will. But if you can think about them and try and get better at them every day, you'll find your team's better, your change initiatives better, your workplace is much more fun.
Interesting point you made in that conversation, Steve, which was you had no experience when you went to 9MSN as their CEO. And I challenge a lot of recruiters or people or businesses in that recruiting space today, because we quite often look for people with experience in that field, and we may potentially overlook someone who's great at the softer skills, being leading people and, creating the pathway for people to be successful. And we default for the experience all the time.
Yeah. Look, I think that in the internal recruitment space, there's more of that movement. So you see someone who's a really good leader in one part of your business, you'll move them. But what you're right, when you're talking about external recruitment, it's very, very conservative. And I guess that's because the capability of someone as a leader or a manager, as a change agent, is just harder to know before they've worked in your environment. I mean, Rachel Powell was head of HR at Xero and then ended up as chief customer officer, because Rachel is a great leader of, probably the best leader of change I've worked with. So I knew I could move her to different functions and she would learn quickly and she would lead change well because she was able to listen, learn, and get the best from others. So that's where, internally it makes sense, but externally it's harder to gauge. It's unfortunate because I do think we should give people with those softer skills, good leadership skills, more opportunities to cross domains, but it's really just hard to gauge as a hiring manager.
Mm. During your time in business, who have been your most influential mentors?
Look, I think there's not one. There's a little bit of many. Steve Jobs on focus, Steve Ballmer at Microsoft on bringing energy and passion and let's say ambition to a company. There's Brian Finn on just how to treat people and respect people of all standing. In your life as a CEO. My dad was a massive influence on me. He really was someone who taught me at a very young age that you respect people of all backgrounds, and all people have the potential to be good and successful, and obviously, people should be respected. Never to get too carried away with yourself. And well, he taught me a lot about gender equity too. In the backyard, when my brother and I made the mistake of telling our sister she couldn't do something that we could do she couldn't play a game because she was a girl. He heard that and he came running down the back steps after us and grabbed us by the collar, banged our heads together, brought our faces into his face. This is like we were about 10 and 8. And he said, if you ever tell her she can't do what you can do, I'll kill you. Do you understand me?
Wow.
He was very much of that view. So, I think, I take a lot of, in a sense of learning and mentorship. He was also an IBMer for over 30 years of his career. So he was always someone I could go to talk about tech industry and sales and challenges. But there have been many. I had a lot of good first line managers in my IBM days that, taught me a lot. A great manager on the driveway of St Ives Liquorland, a guy called Joe Pritchard, who taught me how you can, in a kind way, tell someone they're not doing a good job and help them learn by raising that with them. So yeah, many people, many experience, and people who've worked for me that have also, come in and sat down in my office and told me a few home truths that I might not have wanted to hear.
Well, before I let you go, my last question to you is, what advice would you give leaders emerging or, been in their roles for a long time, to grow their impact and influence?
It's all about people. It's all about people. And no matter how much time you spend connecting with, understanding other people, you'll never spend as much time as you should. For whatever reason, we do not appreciate the human element of what we do enough. And so I would say obsess about people, because change doesn't come without people initiating it and people resisting it, people being at the heart of it. So that would be my message. And that means knowing yourself and really understanding how the way you are influences or impacts on the way you connect with others.
One more. I did say it was my last question, but what's next for you? I know you've got the book coming out. I'll mention that again, Through Shifts and Shocks, Lessons from the Front Line of Technology and Change. It is available in all bookstores as of the 27th of November. So apart from doing book tours, what's next for you?
Look, at this point, I really want to focus on getting the message out. So I really appreciate you having me on today. So thank you. And thanks for what you do, because we need people like you out there talking about these really important. If only we could understand that what you're talking about in your podcast and work you do is the most important agenda, because it is what lies behind us being able to evolve this planet to be what it can and should be. And the impediment to that is the lack of really great leadership in too many places at this particular point in time. So I want to teach, I want to coach and speak about these things. And, Occasionally what I might do is a couple of things that get me back into making sure I don't forget what the inside of an office and a boardroom looks like. But I'm not in any rush to do that.
Well, good luck with it, Steve, and good luck with the book. I'm sure it'll go very well. And thank you for your time on our podcast.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me.
If you like what you've heard, please share, rate and review this podcast. And don't forget to share it with anyone who might benefit from hearing it. The producer of Future Fit Leadership is Maritza Barone from Guide Your Light Network. If you would like to reach out to me, please DM me on any of my social media platforms. I'm available for speaking at conferences or consulting to your business. Future Fit is created in partnership with Future Leadership, a capability ecosystem for boards and executives. If you'd like to join the community and receive a free takeaway each week, sign up to the Future Exchange app in my show notes. Thank you for having me in your space.
This is a Guide Your Light Network production, creating podcasts with purpose.